Well, thank you, Jonathan, once again for agreeing to this interview. Thank you very much. So the first question I wanted to ask you is just how did you get into cartooning? What drew you to cartooning?
I always start when I'm asked this question, and I think every cartoonist is asked this question. I, I I always start by saying that I think every cartoonist you'll meet probably started really young and thought that they would like to become a cartoonist. It really does go back to when one's quite young, mostly. But at the same time, I would say that a lot of people kind of start out as almost as cartoonists. When you're a kid, you feel like you're a cartoonist. In some ways, I wasn't that different from many of my friends. But what happens is that some of us keep that going, because you have to really almost be a little bit at odds with the world in the way that a child might be. You look at things in a very strange way, and you actually have to kind of keep that. So I always thought I wanted to become a cartoonist, and in fact, as I became a little more adult, it was the old apartheid dark days, the dark era, and I didn't want to become a sort of a person who makes jokes in a newspaper for privileged people so much. I really realized that there could be something powerful to be done with cartooning, and I sort of didn't know how. So I went to study architecture, and I realized my heart wasn't in it. I was also trying to stay out of the army, because if, as a white male, in those days, I would be conscripted into the apartheid army if I was not studying or didn't have a valid reason. So I spent a few years studying architecture, learned quite a lot, and then I tried to change courses and study graphic design. And I thought, actually, I traveled overseas, met some famous cartoonists, including in France. I went to meet Uderzo, which was amazing, because I pressed his doorbell at 11 o'clock at night, unannounced, because I got lost in Paris. And he was so kind, he actually invited me into his home, and we spoke for about 15 minutes through his daughter, who interpreted, because he couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak French. And I never forgot that. Although he wasn't a political cartoonist, a comic, everyone in the world knows Uderzo Asterix, but it gave me some kind of confidence that maybe I could go and try and do it. So I tried to get I stopped my architectural studies, changed courses, and then the apartheid army conscripted me. And so suddenly I had to make a choice. I didn't know how to not go, because you could go to jail for 6 years. So I went to the army, but I refused, when the activist side in me and the cartooning side found expression. Because while I was in the army, I then got arrested for my activism. I was working for an organization called the United Democratic Front, which was when the African National Congress was banned. We could work above ground, and from then I worked for many political organizations and started working for newspapers during the apartheid era, and that's how I got into cartooning.
So you say you were thinking about it from an early age, but were you thinking about it in a political way or not really?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Yes, and when I was really young, I wasn't thinking politically at all. I loved Giles. I don't know how, very much in the sort of Anglophone world, English world, people know Giles is a great sort of social cartoonist. He was a lefty at heart, but his cartoons weren't overtly political. They were about the common people and how they kind of sometimes stand up against authority, not always in the most overtly political way. So I got into Giles, and then Peanuts, comics, that sort of thing. Tintin was a huge influence on me. So a lot of the kind of comics and all of that. And then when I was a young teenager, I found that there was one political cartoonist working in a Cape Town newspaper. He was white and male like me and privileged, but he had a nice journalistic head. He was a journalist by training, and and he was very strongly anti-apartheid and very clever about it. And so only when I was sort of in my teens, I started thinking about the possibility of cartoons as a political statement, as a form of activism. And as I said, I lost confidence in that and had to come back to that in my 20s. Yeah.
So the next question I wanted to ask, actually two questions I have are kind of linked in a way, but what's sort of the constraints, the taboos in South Africa, and maybe more generally that you're up against?
As a white male, the kind of constraints that I often have are about that kind of privilege. I mean, we have the pretty much, at least, if not the most unequal society in the world. It's always vying with Brazil. At the moment, we may be seen as the most unequal society in the world, South Africa, still, all these years after apartheid. So the kind of taboos and constraints are often, for me, connected with where do I speak from? From what position am I speaking? I am privileged. I am white. I am male. I tick all those boxes. So sometimes when I'm trying to speak about certain subjects, it may not be the exact subject itself that is the constraint, but it's how I'm seen to be speaking about it. And that becomes a constraint. So this cartoon here is the one for which I'm best known. It's a scary, rough cartoon. Go for it, boss. It is about Jacob Zuma when he was ANC president, but not yet president of the country. And he already had almost a decade of corruption charges hanging over his head, even at this stage. And he was trying to get rid of the corruption. And what he was doing was bullying the justice system with the help of all these kind of allies, these people in the ANC, various parts of the ANC, and also the Communist Party and the trade unions. And they were all threatening the judiciary and making angry statements. And so I felt I really wanted to do a powerful thing. So I did this cartoon, which you can see looks like a gang rape scene about to happen. But it's a metaphor because Lady Justice, the justice system, is a metaphor. The thing is, as someone white and male and privileged, there were people who read all kinds of things into this. It was regarded as the most powerful cartoon I've ever done, and probably still is. And it's on a list of 15 cartoons that changed the world. Of course, that's a subjective list, but it is there at number 15, and I'm very privileged to be on that, honored to be on that list. But the point was that there were many people who took issue with my using the rape metaphor at all. I stand by the cartoon, but there's lots of debates around it. That's the kind of thing that is difficult, how you do things. And I can discuss that more as we go up.
Yes, I had looked you up before this interview, and I had seen about this this cartoon controversy. You say you stand by it, and you admit it's very controversial. Is there anything about this cartoon you regret, or are you still quite proud of it?
I am proud of it. I do know that there's no universal, there's no actual consensus. I think by now, certainly with the first cartoon and some of the follow-up ones, there's some acknowledgement that that politically it was very, it said exactly what I wanted to say, and many people have pointed back to it, because it's about corruption and abuse of power. It's not and there's empathy. I'm thinking there's empathy with the figure, the metaphorical figure of Lady Justice, and it actually says things about the patriarchy and the violence in our society as well. So yeah, so I do stand by it.
What impact is the legacy of apartheid having on South Africa today, and what role does it play in your work?
Well, okay, yeah. So this it has a huge impact on society, and it plays a big role in my work. I mean, these cartoons are from more than 20 years ago. Okay, let's look at that one first. Yes. the truth that you see, that cliff there with a chasm between the chasm, truth on the one side and reconciliation on the other. And it's Archbishop Tutu leading both victims and perpetrators of the abuses of the apartheid era. Archbishop Tutu led the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that was a hell of a difficult job that he had. And that kind of oops moment, which is a kind of classic cartooning oops moment, it's something everyone uses a lot in cartoons, where you think that you can accomplish something and then you see the protagonist suddenly realizing this is going to be more difficult than I thought. There's so many different ways that we use that oops moment. And so it looks as if that truth and reconciliation are very close together, but there's this massive chasm between them, and it's difficult to breach those, because we got to a lot of truth, but we really didn't get to a lot of reconciliation. And I think that many of us, white and black, were pointing out that there were the white people as a group really didn't come to terms with the indignity and the inhumanity of apartheid. I mean, it was seen by the United Nations as a crime against humanity, but a lot of white people were saying kind of, well, let's move on. Thank goodness we've had Nelson Mandela there. Now we can fix the society and let's move on. But if you don't actually address those issues, they fester. And this next one was one when Thabo Mbeki, I haven't got any cartoons showing Thabo Mbeki here, but he was not as much of a reconciler as Nelson Mandela was. And he said something that I agreed with. He basically said, well, we still have kind of two nations. And a lot of white people got really, really angry about that. And they said, come on, we need to actually just get on and move on. That's been a constant theme amongst a lot of white people. And there were many white people who were saying they were too young to have participated, or they in apartheid, or they didn't know what was happening and the government was lying to them and they were out of the country, etc., etc. And I got really tired of that debate, and then I did this cartoon, Whites Who Never Benefited from Apartheid. And of course the rest of the cartoon is blank, because every white person then, during the apartheid era, and now in the many years afterwards, by virtue of our white skin and privilege and the imperialism and colonialism that created South Africa in the way that it is, we are all beneficiaries, and there's no getting away from it, and we've got to find ways to kind of fix it. But again, a lot of white people were very angry at this cartoon, because that's not how they just, a lot of people can't get their heads around how privilege actually works from generation to generation, and you have to kind of find ways to break it. You do need various forms of affirmative action to break those cycles. So it was that legacy really is something I speak about a lot, and especially in the cartoons. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw this cartoon. It's very powerful. I suppose it is kind of one of the later questions, but I'll ask it anyway. People in the UK, and I think in the West more generally, have quite a sort of dreamy, idealistic view of post-apartheid South Africa after Nelson Mandela. To what extent was that idea, that image, ever really true?
Yeah, I thought I would just show a little series here on this sort of Rainbow Nation thing. The Rainbow Nation idea, I'm pretty sure that I was lucky enough to be in the big meeting when this idea was first floated in a powerful way. In 1985, I was at a massive meeting in the City Hall in Cape Town, where Archbishop Tutu was, when there was so much violence and so much killing happening from the apartheid state. And he raised his hands and he said, this cannot continue. He said, we are the rainbow children of God. And he kind of moved his hands back and forth. He said, and people kind of went with him, and it was a very energizing and powerful idea to try and fight against this racism, to have this notion of the rainbow nation, that, and it's obviously very idealistic. Okay, now cut to this one, 1995, Nelson Mandela is president. We are nowhere near as good as the All Blacks at rugby, and somehow or other, we actually managed to beat the All Blacks in rugby, and with our first black player who had come through. It feels like tokenism, but he was Chester Williams. He's in that drawing just behind Nelson Mandela. There's Francois Pienaar, then Mandela, Chester Williams. A lot of black people actually suddenly got into rugby, and it really felt like it was uniting the country. We knew that there was an illusory aspect to it, but it felt like a big moment. The movie Invictus, made by Clint Eastwood with Morgan Freeman and Matt Damon, that was all about this thing. And if you look at the issues around it, how Mandela was uniting the country at a time when it was a real powder keg, there was something that wasn't illusory. There was something that was actually real. It could have actually blown up in ways that it didn't. If you go to the next one, this, I'm afraid, is as early as 2000, again, 21 years ago. And then one day it changed back, and we realized the rainbow was just a temporary illusion. And we're back to kind of the black and white nation. Again, this refers to the sort of Thabo Mbeki two nations idea, not as reconciliatory as Madiba, but very, very important, and something that we need to kind of take stock of. And then the next one is, you jump 1.5 decades to our 2014 election, and there's the Archbishop Tutu. As I said, he's the person who originated the concept in 1985 of the Rainbow Nation. By 1994, you can see that that was still an idea. That was the Madiba sunrise kind of behind the Rainbow Nation. And then by 2014, so it's 20 years later, Jacob Zuma was president, and he won that election. It was his second term. And I often use that shower as that people in South Africa know, and even further afield, it seems, know that image of the shower for Jacob Zuma, and that's kind of washing away the rainbow, all the corruption and the lack of delivery and the self-serving stuff that has permeated. It's very disillusioning to see that, and it is. Yeah, it shows a lot of disillusionment in myself about, where we stand as a Rainbow Nation, I'm afraid. Yeah.
I'll go to question 4 now. Are there any subjects you think that should be off limits for cartoonists? Can cartoonists go too far, I suppose?
That's an interesting question, and it's one that I get asked a lot, and I don't have a standard answer to it. I would say theoretically, almost no subject should be off limits, or no issue should be off limits. I think you can talk about anything in cartoons that you want to talk about as a person, because I'm not doing things that don't reflect what I think. So I should be able to talk about anything. I think in practice, it's slightly different because of what I referred to earlier when we were looking at the Lady Justice cartoon. It's sometimes how you portray something may not always be received by people in the way that you want it to be received. So I think you have to think, especially these days with social media, my feeling is that I almost feel like it's not as if any subject or issue should be off limits, but I do think that how one says it is going to impact on how it's received. And there are in the last 10, 15 years, I've had to think very hard about that. As I said, I stand by the Lady Justice cartoon. I've done 1 or 2 other cartoons where I realize that my trying to set up a kind of a dialogue and a continuum that I've always managed for years and years, from the 80s through to maybe around about 2010 or something like that. That kind of worked. People saw the continuum, they saw the dialogue, they put things within a context. But these days, decontextualizing things, taking one cartoon out and saying, this cartoonist is racist because of this particular depiction, or this cartoonist is sexist or misogynist or homophobic or something. Sometimes I'm trying to do something satirical, and I'm using something that people who don't see that continuum or don't understand it or don't want to will twist. So that has become a major constraint for me. It's as satirical, but I'll take it literally by people who either have a different understanding or don't understand cartoons in a particular way, or want to find ways to take you down because on many other issues you disagree with those people. So it's a bit of a complex answer, and I can deal with it more if you'd like me to. But yeah, it's a tough one.
No, that's very good. So the next question: what impact do you think that cartoons can have in South Africa today? What reception do they get in South Africa?
Again, a slightly nuanced, the nuanced answer. I can't. I think that I was lucky enough to be working in a period in from the late 80s, a little bit where my cartoons were being seen a lot in struggle, in the struggle context, and had some impact there. Then I worked in the 90s and in the early 2000s, when the newspaper form was still very powerful in South Africa. I mean, the newspaper, the Sowetan, which is published in Soweto. I was sitting in Cape Town, but working in this newspaper, the Sowetan, and it had a big readership, and I know my cartoons were very influential. I was very lucky to be in that situation. I was also working for other publications, but I had a very wide spread of publications and different kinds of readership. And I know that the cartoons were making a big impact. There was actually an assessment done by Cartoonist Rights Network International, where they looked at a number of democracies. It's hard to see the impact of cartoons in real totalitarian societies, but they came up with this idea that there was no country that they'd found, no democracy that they'd found during that period where cartoons had had a bigger impact than in South Africa. Mandela's presidency, and the fact that he loved the cartoons, and the fact that that things were opening up. Suddenly there were also opportunities for young Black cartoonists, which there hadn't been in the apartheid era. So I do think cartoons had a huge impact in that period, kind of 1994 to maybe around 2010. I think that with the way that things have sort of splintered now, with the newspapers having less of a readership, and social media being out there, it's now things have kind of come into pockets, and you find with with the people speaking to specific audiences, there's a lot of, it's hard to say exactly. The cartoons are still having a big impact, but there's a lot of sort of twisting and co-opting. Even my cartoons are co-opted by right-wing groups or by all kinds of different groups that I don't even know about, and the words are changed. And so suddenly the impact of cartoons is it's still big, but it can be manipulated, it can be pushed around, the meanings can be changed. I can suddenly be seen by some people as a right-winger because they cherry pick certain cartoons that I've done against corruption, and then And so there are certain groupings in South Africa that try and paint me as a racist right-winger. So it has become unbelievably contested and more difficult than it used to be.
How has COVID impacted South Africa? How do you portray it in your cartoons, and has it had any effect on the recent unrest and violence?
The first part of the question, how's COVID affected South Africa? I think is the first cartoon that I've got up there is one that I think speaks to South Africa and some other places. The one of the Sisyphus one. No, before that. Yes, this one. Okay. So yeah, you know, quite early on in the coronavirus pandemic, I did this cartoon as South Africa was sort of in its first heavy lockdown, and that's our government that sort of was rolling in the old Sisyphus metaphor, the Greek guy whose punishment was to roll the rock up the hill and never actually get to the top. But in our case, I felt, and not only our case, other places as well, but specifically around South Africa, I felt that it was a good way to show this would be that not only is he having a hard time rolling the boulder up the hill, but there are these other boulders coming down which make it even harder, which are going to come down and crash and make it even more difficult. And that's, you know, poverty, apartheid, the apartheid geography. What that means is how apartheid has spatially defined who lives where. You know, you still have traditionally the African townships, you know, the places where people are living cheek by jowl and in poverty, and where things haven't improved a hell of a lot. The inequality, which I've mentioned already, the apartheid style lockdown. Unfortunately, this new government enforced lockdown in a way that's very similar to the way the old white government would have done, where the soldiers and police have come into townships and have humiliated and brutalized the people who are, you know, predominantly the black people in the townships, and have forced them to do sort of weird exercise in the street if they seem to be breaking regulations, have actually killed a number of people. And injured people and that sort of thing, and of course unemployment and hunger. So all of those things make it South Africa a special case. But I'm well aware that across the world, I think the way that a pandemic works is that it does enforce all of those kind of fault lines in societies everywhere. So you'd find in Brazil similar kind of thing, India, those are two good examples, but many other places where I think it enforces the sort of fault lines. It increases those fault lines everywhere, but in places that are similar to us with huge inequality and poverty and pockets of rich people, it makes it even more stark. And then with us, we have the specifics of the apartheid geography. So that I think this cartoon really says a lot about how I think it works. But if you go to the next one, it's the one about the post George Floyd one, with the 3 masks on the face. There we go. After the killing of George Floyd in the United States, the basically torture and killing of an unarmed black man by, you know, a policeman with his knee on his neck. It was horrific. You couldn't watch that. It was absolutely terrible. The response in South Africa was weirdly unrecognizing of what had happened in South Africa, and with the kind of the way that the way lockdown was enforced. We stand with African Americans over the murder of George Floyd by law enforcement officers, and that's our president Cyril Ramaphosa, and then the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Police, and of course they've got the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil version of masks, And in the background, there's somebody being killed by army officers, a guy called Collins Khoza. And in the even further back, you see, and 12 other Black South Africans killed in lockdown, mostly by police. So, okay, the particulars of that murder of George Floyd were particularly horrendous. But in terms of numbers of people killed by army and police, I mean, we had at that stage already 13 dead during lockdown in the first month or 5-6 weeks. It's a horrific number, and the hypocrisy of the kind of self-righteous response of government and of authorities here in South Africa to the death of George Floyd, when the way that lockdown was being enforced was pretty much that same way, and that killed a lot more people. I found that breathtakingly awful. And so I wanted to show that. I don't know if the next one, you've got that book cover, the To the Macarona. It's the orangey book cover. Yeah, there we go. That's my most recent annual, and that also I did a sort of song where I like the Macarena. It was and I then thought that was a good way to a good drawing to use as my cover for my annual. But the whole thing of all the different things that we had to, the way the world had to respond to COVID, but in South Africa, and certainly not only in South Africa, we had, there at the end of the line, you've got Ace Magashule. He's the ANC Secretary General, and he's not doing the same kind of bumping of elbows and all that stuff that you had. He's basically getting the corrupt funds behind his back, because the COVID-19 funds in South Africa were abused again by people in power, and that is another aspect of what, basically corruption is a massive problem everywhere, but in South Africa we have just been through a thing of what we call state capture, so where the state kind of farms out its functions to other people. That's how bad it's got, and this is still part of that. He's part of that faction, and that's another part of what I've tried to show in a lot of my cartoons, the kind of residue of state capture in the way that that funds are abused. They're meant to be used for the health services and for people who are in dire need of them. And then you asked that question about the unrest in KwaZulu-Natal, which is also, of course, in near Johannesburg. It was 2 provinces. And was COVID a factor? Yes, COVID is a factor because people are desperate. But why did it happen only in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng, and not in the 7 other provinces where people are equally in dire need and in poverty and where there's inequality? It happened there because it started as a free Jacob Zuma kind of the pro-Zuma faction. Now that Zuma's been arrested, they sparked it, but they actually tried to. They actually tried to even spark an insurrection. Yes, if you go to this one, opportunistic viruses of South Africa, the Aluta continua virus, and I don't know if everyone's got this obscured, and on my screen it's obscured. I can't see but it says free Jacob Zuma, and then free flat screen TV, free trainers, free microwave, free liquor, free meds, free. So it started as a free Jacob Zuma thing, but then it basically became, well, take what you can get. So there were instigators who were actually trying. They did things like deliver tires on 4x4s, deliver tires to certain areas, set them alight. They bust in people to not only loot, but to actually destroy buildings. And they were actually trying to start an insurrection because Zuma was jailed. And in that sense, COVID had very little to do with it. Where it's going to have something to do with it is that people who were easy to mobilize because they're already poverty stricken. Then lockdown has made things even more dire, and people need stuff. But you had people taking, flat screen TVs, and you had relatively well-off people looting along with poverty-stricken people. So it gets very messy. And as well as that, it was this deliberate insurrection that only took place in provinces where Jacob Zuma has that kind of following. So COVID in that sense didn't really have that much to do with it.
What do you think this means for the future of South Africa?
There's one cartoon that I put, one book cover that I've put there called which side is up. I don't know if you can just put that one there. Yeah, that's the second last annual that I did, but it's still very, very pertinent. The ANC is still a bit. It's what has happened to the African National Congress is really sad. I mean, this great liberation movement has become a party horribly divided, very corrupt, almost through and through. Cyril Ramaphosa is at the top. Which side is up? You've got the King, Cyril Ramaphosa, with his hand on the scales of justice, and underneath you've got Ace Magashule. And it started because his name is Ace. I mean, his nickname, and we all know him as Ace. He's got his hand in the till and he's stabbing the president. And you see that half of the ANC has also got the shower as part of its logo. It refers to the Zuma faction. So a huge part of what can be done in South Africa is whether or not Cyril Ramaphosa has the wherewithal, the political clout, the will to marshal the best part of the ANC, which is unfortunately dwindling, and some other parts of society which can work. We have a strong civil society here. We have a few opposition parties that are not great, but they're doing some good work. We have, anti-corruption activists. We have health activists. As I say, civil society is good, media is good, but increasingly, it's like a desperate fight to see if the good faction of the ANC, which I'm afraid is, as I said, dwindling and is not that great, if that can come out on top, and we can actually reverse some of the effects of corruption and start delivering what is needed, that there's lots of ifs there. I'm using many ifs. I mean, each time we go through a crisis, you have to say, well, we're resilient people and we pick ourselves up and we move on. But I'm afraid that things are getting that's getting harder to hold on to. Things are dire here, and with COVID and with this terrible the looting and actual insurrection that was attempted, and with the corruption that we're still dealing with, where billions and billions of whatever currency you put it in, pounds, dollars, even more billions if you're talking South African rands. It's getting really hard to see how we're going to come out of this. I mean, every time we have to pick ourselves up and say, okay, we managed to get through apartheid, and we went through that period where we got great new institutions under Nelson Mandela, and then we managed to host a World Cup of soccer, and we this and that and the other. Right now, it's looking pretty tough. I'm afraid I'm a little pessimistic at the moment. I mean, I still hold on to these things, and I still hope that that combination of civil society and the best parts of some of those parties that we have. I mean, the ANC, as I say, is still the most influential and still has the most promise in that little group that is still trying. But things are looking pretty tough here. I mean, they're looking tough everywhere. We mishandled the COVID, we mishandled the lockdown, and then mishandled the vaccine rollout. It's starting to kind of pick up now. But yeah, we've had a terrible third wave here in South Africa. And then we've had these crippling riots. So I don't know why I still hope, but I do. And I do think we're resilient, but I think things are really bleak at the moment. They are tough.
Well, thank you very much. Those are the questions I had for you, but that was so interesting. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Sorry that it's. I mean, I think that kind of some of the questions and of course the issues that I deal with make it feel as if it's sort of hopeless. I don't want to give the impression that I'm completely hopeless, because if I was, I would probably stop doing what I do. I mean, I think all of us cartoonists deal with things that are really difficult, and we're in societies as contested as ours, the South African society, it's going to look like it may look pretty tough, but I mean, you still see that there's often humor in the cartoons, and there's a little bit of a spark, and I think I don't want to give the impression that I am really completely hopeless. I always find ways to along with my journalist friends and my activist friends, and we do think that things can be done.